All right, we are live. Hopefully. Okay. Hi everyone. Sorry for the late post. So I thought I would do tip 7. So for those who haven't caught the previous vlog, essentially this is just a little series on the 10 success tips to overcome the most common, I guess, challenges that most people will face when embarking on any kind of new regime. This one's obviously focused a little bit more on health and fitness, but it has broad application across anything in terms of any changes that you're trying to make. So today's one, a little bit cheesy, but hopefully a little bit more fun for you, and also timely given that Easter is just around the corner. So measurement and excellent expectations. And sorry, there's actually no Easter eggs in this post. So if you're expecting chocolate, sorry. So this is just building upon yesterday's tip, which is around, the why you would want to measure the goals. Measure certain things to make sure that you're tracking towards your goals. And we talked a little bit about measuring the right things and then not obsessing about getting too much into the detail and absolutely measuring every single thing that you can get. There's got to be a balance there. So this one kind of builds on that, and it goes on and builds on some of the other points as well. So, so assuming that you've got a specific goal and you've gotten, the individualization process right for you, you should see some good progress over a reasonable amount of time. That'll obviously vary depending on where you're starting, what you're doing, and how quickly you're doing those changes and sustaining them. Sometimes you might see weekly progress. However, it doesn't matter how well you're tracking along a goal. At some point, even the weekly progress doesn't go on indefinitely, and you need to adjust the plan. And also, I guess the other thing is as well is that our body doesn't function in a linear function. Have you ever noticed as well that anything that you plan or you set a goal on, you have an idea and you always think it's going to be linear. It doesn't matter what you do. You might think it's linear and it, maybe goes up and, on a slight curve. But, anything that you do, anything that you start, it ends up kind of going up and down and around and, all over the place, right? And eventually you get to the place on the map. If you think about your goals on a map and the journey there, what we didn't account for was the terrain that we had to travel to get there. So the same thing happens, right, with any kind of goal, and particularly with our health and fitness. And we're also dealing with a dynamic entity, which is ourselves and the environment that we're functioning in, right? And things are going to change that we weren't aware of, and we're going to face it and respond to it in different ways as well. So quite often you'll find that, when you're progressing towards your goals, that you'll have like these bursts of success, and then followed by a little bit of stagnation. You might lose like 3 or 5 kilos in the first month or so, and then after that, nothing. And then maybe another month later, you might lose another couple of kilos and then nothing, and so on. So it's not something to get discouraged about. You don't need to change the plan that frequently. Sometimes, things just take a little bit longer to actually translate. It's when you have an extended period of time when nothing's changing that you need to adjust things, or if you're going for a very particular and aggressive goal and you're tweaking things towards that final area, then the frequency might increase depending on what you're trying to do. But anyway, the story to kind of get this point across was around, imagine that you've got like a chicken egg. We won't talk about the process around how it got fertilized, but say it's just freshly fertilized, and you can look at the fertile egg, and I mean, you probably remember maybe doing this at school where they had like the chicken's eggs in the little incubator, and every day you would go and watch to see if anything changed, and most often it was really boring, right? Because nothing happened for like a month, which is a very long time when you're like 6 years old. But anyway, the point is you won't see anything happen. You expect to see something, so you're like that 6-year-old that just expects to see something, anything, but nothing changes. And then one day, like seemingly no different to any other day, out of the blue, like the egg begins to like shake and out emerges a little chirping chick, right? And actually, they don't look as fluffy and as cute as you think. They're usually quite, covered in yolk and look quite ugly, actually, when they first come out until they get their little fluff on. But anyway, the whole point is that, while it seemed like the egg was doing nothing and sat idle in the incubator for like a month or so, things are actually changing quite rapidly under the surface. So a lot of the times we spend too much time, I guess, looking at the outside of the egg, so the analogy, obviously, our outer shell. That's really when we should probably stop and think about what's going on in the inside. But instead, we generally get frustrated with the lack of progress, and that's to be expected to a degree. But what we don't realize is that oftentimes things are actually changing within us. It's just not what we can see or what we happen to be looking at. So the trick here is to spread out what you're measuring, to get some different data points, and that's why we use a combination of qualitative and quantitative data points. And you look at a number of different areas of progress to make sure you're not missing important changes or missing also, any underlying issues. And of course, what we'll probably do post this series is actually provide some measurement guides and some, I guess some free posts around how you might want to track things, and what might be, suitable for where you're at and where you want to get to. And I guess the other point is as well, right? So like, if you're doing everything you're supposed to do in terms of your plan and that's a big if, because, as we've talked about, most people be doing an 80-20 rule, which is fine. A lot of people try and do a 50-50 rule, and then that's going to have a completely different impact altogether. So you really need to be honest with yourself around how, consistent you're being on a daily basis, and you still see nothing happening. Well, the first thing to do is just keep in mind the story of the chicken egg in the incubators. And recognize that from an outside for a while you may not see a change, particularly when you're first starting. The trick is that if you keep being consistent and doing the things and working with people on your team to track your progress and so on and keep you accountable, then the internal changes will eventually add up, and what you've been expecting to happen will eventually emerge. So keep going is basically the idea. Don't lose faith because you can't necessarily see the changes on the outside. Look to some other measures that will give you the confidence that things are actually changing. All right, stay tuned for tip 8 tomorrow. All right, ciao.